On the ancient world of Xandor, deep in the heart of the Galactic sector, stood the magnificent city of Xenvoria. Its gleaming spires reached up into the crimson sky, reflecting the brilliance of distant stars. Xenvoria had long been the heart of the Galactic Alliance, a coalition of hundreds of star systems bound together in a fragile peace. This grand metropolis was a marvel of unity, a fusion of cultures, architectures, and technologies from across the galaxy. At its center, rising above all else, was the Celestial Citadel, the seat of power for the Supreme Council. Inside the Citadel, the air was thick with tension. The Council Chamber, an enormous circular room made of obsidian and starlight-infused glass, echoed with heated voices. The Galactic Alliance was in crisis, and for the first time in centuries, its future seemed uncertain. "Elder Vortex, you will be heard," declared Osiris, the calm, silver-eyed elder from the Axiom race, his deep voice resonating in the vast chamber. "But be mindful of your words. We are here for unity, not discord." Vortex, a towering figure from the Venthar race, was visibly shaking with rage. His skin, a deep shade of cerulean, seemed to glow with the intensity of his anger. His fists were clenched, and his sharp gaze pierced through the council. "Unity? Unity!" he thundered, his voice booming through the chamber. "Our colonies on the far edge of the Alliance's borders burn under relentless Grozilian attacks. Our people die, every day, while this council debates, dithers, and does nothing." His eyes flashed as he scanned the room, daring any of the other council members to contradict him. There was a heavy silence for a moment, broken only by the subtle hum of the Citadel's energy conduits. Vortex stepped forward, leaning on the grand circular table that separated the council members, his voice softening but losing none of its sharpness. "How long can we resist? How many more Venthar lives must be lost before we act?" The room trembled with murmurs, and the holographic images of the various council members flickered slightly. Not all of them were physically present in Xenvoria. Many attended via long-range projection, their ethereal forms casting ghostly light across the chamber. But the gravity of the situation was undeniable. Axiras, ever the voice of reason, stood unperturbed by Vortex's outburst. He folded his hands and spoke, his tone measured. "Elder Vortex, the Grozilians are not a foe we can treat lightly. You must understand, their technology has surpassed anything we currently possess. Engaging them recklessly would lead to devastation far worse than what we have seen." "Reckless?" Vortex snapped, his glowing eyes narrowing. "Is it reckless to defend our people? Is it reckless to demand action while we still have something left to save? Calm yourselves, both of you." A new voice rang out, powerful and commanding. Krasus, the fiery elder from the Calderia race, rose from his seat, his fiery red skin and molten gold eyes glowing with intensity. Krasus was a warrior, a proud descendant of those who had fought the Grozilians 2 millennia ago, when they were first driven into the unexplored reaches of the galaxy. He had little patience for deliberation. "Vortex is right," he barked. "The Grozilians are abominations. 2,000 years ago, we drove them from our space and crushed them. We banished them to the void and they were forgotten. If we could destroy them, then we can do it now." The room filled with murmurs again. Krasus's words resonated with many on the council. The Grozilians were a race remembered only in the darkest histories of the galaxy. Genocidal conquerors who once sought to subjugate every star system they encountered. Their defeat, led by the Terraneans, was the stuff of legend. Axirs, however, shook his head solemnly. 2,000 years ago, he began, we had an ally unlike any in the galaxy's history. The Terraneans were the key to our victory. They possessed knowledge and technology far beyond our own, and it was they who led the final assault against the Grozilians. Without them, we would not have survived. "Terraneans," whispered one of the holographic council members, their voice filled with awe and longing. The memory of the Terraneans still loomed large in the galaxy, though they had long since disappeared. Vortex's brow furrowed. "But the Terraneans are gone, Axiras. Their world was destroyed, and they vanished into the stars. Their fleet, what was left of it, sailed into the void, and no one knows where they went. We cannot afford to cling to the hope that they will return." "Yes," Axiras admitted, his silver eyes dimming with sorrow. "The Terraneans boarded their great ships and disappeared. They left us nothing. Their cities turned to dust, their knowledge lost. and it is that very loss that has left us vulnerable. Krasus, growing more agitated, slammed his fist onto the table, causing a ripple in the holographic projections. And what do you suggest, Axiers? That we sit here and wait to be slaughtered? The Grozilians are ready. They have the technology to obliterate us. Do you wish to wait until they strike, and we are powerless to stop them? Axiers looked long and hard at Krasus, then at Vortex. No, he said quietly. I do not wish to wait, but we must be wise. The Grozilians have grown stronger in our absence of action. They are no longer the savage brutes we once faced. They are patient now, cunning. If we do not play this carefully, we will lose everything. Vortex was seething with frustration. What is your plan, Axiers? He spat. You speak of wisdom and caution, but offer no solutions. My people are dying now. I cannot afford to wait for a plan that may never come. The room fell silent again. The council was divided, and no clear path seemed evident. Yet, unknown to them all, the shadows of the past were stirring. Across the galaxy, at the very edges of Alliance territory, the stars began to shift. In the far reaches of space, where once there had been only silence and void, massive shapes now emerged from the darkness. The Grozilian fleets, long hidden and biding their time, were now fully prepared. Thousands of warships, dark, jagged vessels brimming with weapons of unimaginable power, slowly converged, forming an armada that stretched across the stars. At the helm of this vast fleet was Zarnath, the Grozilian warlord who had united the scattered remnants of his race. His cold, insectoid eyes gazed out from the bridge of his flagship, the Wrath of Oblivion, and a twisted smile formed on his mandibles. The time had come. For 2,000 years, the Grozilians had nursed their wounds, learning, evolving. Their hatred for the Alliance had only grown stronger with each passing century, fueled by their desire for vengeance. Now, with the Terraneans gone, nothing stood in their way. And as the Grozilian warships surged forward, their engines roaring like the fury of a dying star, the galaxy trembled in fear. The invasion had begun. The outpost stood alone on the cold surface of Zorth Prime, a desolate moon on the very fringes of Alliance territory. Surrounded by barren craters and perpetual night, it was one of many remote stations tasked with monitoring the uncharted sectors of space. For years, this outpost, Outpost Zeta-12, had reported nothing more than the occasional drifting asteroid or minor space anomaly. It was a forgotten post, considered by most in the Alliance military to be a dead-end assignment. Inside the cramped control room, two soldiers, Karos and Fennec, sat lazily at their monitoring stations. The dim light of holographic radars flickered before them, casting eerie blue shadows across their tired faces. The hum of the machinery and the occasional beep of a scan were the only sounds that filled the silence. Karos, Fennec began, leaning back in his chair, his voice tinged with boredom. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't stuck here? I mean, seriously, there's got to be more to life than staring at empty space all day. Karos, a man of few words, glanced over at Fennec and smirked. I'd probably be back on Valara, tending to my family's farm. Not much more exciting than this. Fennec chuckled. A farm? Man, I don't know how you could stand that. I'd be in some paradise, lounging on the beaches of Centaura, or racing skimmers in the Ankarian canyons. Karos shook his head, his eyes drifting back to his station. We can't all be space cowboys, Fennec. They fell into a comfortable silence again, the monotony of their duties lulling them into complacency. But then, something caught Karos's eye. The holographic display in front of him flickered slightly, and a small red dot appeared on the edge of the screen. His brow furrowed, and he tapped a few keys on his console, zooming in on the anomaly. Another red dot appeared. Then another. Fennec, Karos said quietly, his voice tense. Come look at this. Fennec, sensing the change in tone, leaned forward in his chair and squinted at Karos's screen. What is it? He asked, his tone suddenly serious. I don't know, Karos muttered. At first I thought it was a glitch, but before he could finish, more red dots began to materialize on the hologram, slowly at first, then multiplying rapidly. Hundreds of them. They spread out across the display, like a swarm of locusts advancing through space. By the stars, Fennec whispered, his heart pounding. That's an entire fleet. Karos shot up from his chair, his training kicking in. He slammed his hand on the emergency comms button, connecting directly to the Alliance command center on Zenvoria. His voice was shaky but controlled. "Outpost Zeta 12 to Alliance Command," he shouted. "This is Karos, reporting massive incoming signatures on the outer perimeter. Hundreds of unidentified ships, bearing 120 degrees, heading straight into Alliance space. Repeat, we are detecting a massive fleet." "Zeta 12, confirm the number of contacts," came the cool mechanical response from the command. Karos glanced back at the screen. The hologram now lit up like a blood-red nebula of enemy vessels. His throat tightened. "Confirmed," he said, his voice low. "There are hundreds of them." Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the outpost, and the radar began flashing wildly. The Grozilians had arrived. Before Karos or Fennec could react, the outpost shook violently. The lights flickered, and a deep, thunderous rumble reverberated through the walls. A moment later, the entire control room was plunged into chaos as explosions ripped through the structure. The Grozilians had struck. "They're attacking," Fennec shouted, gripping the edge of his console as another blast rocked the outpost. "We need to evacuate." But there was no time. The Grozilian warships, vicious black ships with jagged hulls, moved like predators through space, targeting everything in their path. Satellites, orbital relays, defense stations, nothing was spared. The Grozilians unleashed a torrent of firepower, their weapons vaporizing entire outposts in seconds. The invasion had begun in earnest. Outpost Zeta 12 was next. Through the shaking and the flickering lights, Karos managed to glance out of the viewport, just in time to see the dark silhouette of a Grozilian battlecruiser descend from the skies, its weapons glowing with deadly energy. "This is it," Karos muttered under his breath. And then the outpost was gone, consumed in a flash of light and fire. On Zenvoria, the destruction of Outpost Zeta 12 was met with immediate alarm. Within minutes, the Alliance High Command had declared a full-scale emergency, and every ship in the sector was mobilized. The Grozilian fleet, vast and unstoppable, was moving deeper into Alliance space, systematically destroying anything that stood in its path. At the center of the effort to respond was Admiral Galen Tross, a veteran of many battles and the commander of the Alliance's 7th Fleet. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Sentinel, watching the tactical displays as the fleet prepared to engage the Grozilian forces. "Admiral," one of his officers said urgently, "the Grozilian fleet has already wiped out half of our outer defenses. They're moving faster than we anticipated." Galen's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have to meet them head-on. Ready the fleet." Across Alliance space, warships from dozens of systems converged. Massive battlecruisers, frigates, and starfighters began assembling into one of the largest flotillas ever gathered by the Alliance. The shimmering energy shields of the fleet glowed in the dark void of space as ship after ship fell into formation. The battle was inevitable. The Grozilian fleet, an overwhelming force of sleek, deadly warships, soon collided with the Alliance flotilla near Zorth Prime. Admiral Tross stood on the command deck of the Sentinel, his eyes narrowed as the enemy came into view on the holo display. Hundreds of Grozilian ships, their hulls dark and twisted, like the claws of some ancient predator, surged forward. The sheer size of their armada dwarfed the Alliance fleet, but Tross knew they had no choice but to fight. "All ships prepare to engage," Tross barked. "Hold the line." The void of space lit up as the first salvos were fired. Beams of energy and heavy plasma missiles streaked across the battlefield, striking shields and hulls with devastating force. Alliance ships returned fire, their turrets blazing as starfighters screamed through the gaps, engaging Grozilian fighters in a deadly dance of maneuvers. The Sentinel unleashed a barrage of missiles, cutting through Grozilian frigates with brutal efficiency. But the Grozilians were relentless. Their ships, faster and more advanced, swarmed the Alliance vessels like a pack of wolves, striking with pinpoint precision. Alliance destroyers exploded in balls of fire as Grozilian strike teams infiltrated their systems, disabling them from the inside. "Admiral, we're losing ships too quickly," shouted one of the tactical officers. Tross gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They couldn't sustain this for long. "Order all cruisers to focus fire on their lead ships. We need to break their line." The battle raged on, and the space between the two fleets became a deadly graveyard of shattered ships and drifting debris. Every second, more Alliance ships were destroyed, but they held their ground, refusing to give an inch. Then, something changed. From the depths of the Grazillian fleet, a massive ship emerged. Larger than any other vessel in the fleet, its dark hull bristled with weapons. The Grazillian dreadnought. It surged forward, its energy cannons charging with ominous power. Tross stared at the massive ship, realizing what was about to happen. "All ships, fall back," he ordered. "Get out of the dreadnought's range." But it was too late. The dreadnought's main cannon fired, a massive beam of energy cutting through space. It ripped through the Alliance lines, vaporizing ships in its path as though they were nothing. Admiral Tross watched in horror as the Sentinels' shields flickered and failed. The ship shuddered under the impact of the beam, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Brace for impact," Tross shouted as the world around him exploded in flames and darkness. The council room in the Celestial Citadel was in utter disarray. The once serene hall where the greatest minds of the Galactic Alliance had gathered for millennia to maintain peace was now a cauldron of fear, anger, and confusion. The holographic displays lining the room flickered with reports of devastation, showing sectors across the Alliance falling under the relentless assault of the Grazillian Armada. At the center of the chaos stood Xyres, his normally calm demeanor replaced by the gravity of the situation. He held in his hand the latest report from the front lines, and as he read it aloud, his voice trembled with the weight of the news. 4 fleets, 4 entire fleets, destroyed, Xyres said, his eyes scanning the council members, many of whom were speaking in panicked tones. The Grazillians have advanced through the outer systems and are now pushing deeper into Alliance territory. Their next target will be the core systems, and then, he paused, his voice dropping, they will come for Zenvoria. The council chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices. Fear, doubt, and hopelessness filled the air as council members debated, shouted, and pointed fingers. The once proud and unified council now seemed fractured, its members unable to agree on a path forward. Suddenly, Vortex, the imposing figure of the Venthar race, rose from his seat and strode to the center podium. His eyes, glowing faintly with intensity, scanned the room before he raised his voice to cut through the noise. "Honored Council," he called, silencing the murmurs around him. "We are at the brink of total collapse. 4 fleets lost. The Grazillians are moving through our systems like a plague. We cannot sit here, paralyzed by indecision. I believe we must bring back Admiral Garx to command our forces." The room fell into stunned silence for a moment, before an uproar of shocked gasps and furious outbursts erupted from several corners of the chamber. Krasus, the elder from the Calderia race, shot to his feet, his molten gold eyes blazing with fury. "Vortex, have you gone mad?" Krasus bellowed, slamming his fists on the table in front of him. "Garx is a traitor. He was stripped of his rank and exiled for a reason. And now you want to bring him back? You're grasping at fantasies, Vortex. Do you want to send a signal into space, hoping the space gods will help you too? I think you've finally lost your mind." Vortex's face darkened, and his fist clenched tightly at his sides. "Garx is not just any admiral," he shouted back, his voice filled with a dangerous mix of anger and determination. "He is the only one who has spent years researching the remains of the Terrans. He understands their tactics, their technology. He's the only one who knows how they fought and how they won. If anyone can slow the Grazillians, it's him." Krasus sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Garx murdered his second in command. That's why he was exiled, Vortex. He's a loose cannon. Bringing him back will only lead to more chaos." Before the argument could escalate further, Xyres raised his hand, calling for calm. "I think Vortex has a point," he said, his voice thoughtful but firm. "Yes, Garx killed his second, but that was in a moment of insubordination. The circumstances around that incident have always been murky. What cannot be denied is Garvex's brilliance. He is the only living officer who has studied the Terranian archives in depth." Krasus glared at Xyres, but the room was now listening. A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber, and the council members began to shift in their seats. "If we bring Garx back, under strict oversight," Xyres continued, "he could offer us a fighting chance. His knowledge of Terranian strategies may be the only thing that can counter the Grazillians' advancements. At the very least, it will buy us more time to formulate a more permanent solution." The chamber was filled with the sound of whispered discussions. Slowly, one by one, the council members nodded their agreement. Finally, Crassus sat back down, folding his arms across his chest in reluctant acceptance. "Very well," Crassus muttered. "But if this backfires, the blood will be on your hands, Vortex." Vortex met Crassus's gaze with a look of cold resolve. "If it saves the Alliance, I will bear that burden." In a secret underground facility on Xandor, the door to a high-security cell slid open with a hiss. 2 armed guards flanked the doorway as Admiral Garx emerged, his face grim and lined with the weight of his exile. His once pristine admiral's uniform had been replaced by the worn clothing of a prisoner, but his eyes still held the fierce intelligence and fire that had made him one of the most feared and respected commanders in the Alliance's history. Standing before him was Vortex, who offered a single nod. "You're being reinstated," Vortex said without preamble. "The Council has authorized you to take command of 5 fleets. We need you to slow the Grozilian advance by any means necessary." Garx smirked slightly, his sharp eyes flicking up to meet Vortex's. "And what changed the Council's mind? They seemed quite happy to leave me in this cell for the rest of my life." "They're desperate," Vortex replied, "and you're the only one who knows how the Terraneans fought." "Desperate times," Garx mused. "I'll take the fleets, but I expect full control, no interference from the Council." "You'll get it," Vortex promised, "but don't make me regret this." Garx gave him a curt nod, then turned toward the exit. "I won't." Within days, Garx was back at the helm, commanding 5 of the Alliance's most powerful remaining fleets. The ships, massive battle cruisers and destroyers, were armed to the teeth, but Garx knew that raw firepower alone wouldn't be enough to stop the Grozilians. He stood on the bridge of the Obsidian Spear, his new flagship, studying the tactical maps that displayed the position of the advancing Grozilian forces. "They're overconfident," Garx muttered, watching the formations of enemy ships. "They think we're finished." "Sir?" one of his tactical officers asked. Garvex's eyes gleamed. "Good, we'll use that arrogance against them." Drawing from his extensive knowledge of Terranian battle tactics, Garx orchestrated a daring counterattack. He divided his fleet, sending smaller strike groups to harass the Grozilians at key choke points in their advance, using hit-and-run attacks designed to confuse and disrupt their formations. While the Grozilians were drawn into these skirmishes, Garx prepared his real assault, a trap inspired by Terranian doctrine. Using the wreckage of destroyed ships, Garx laid a massive debris field across a key sector of space, masking the approach of his main fleet. When the Grozilians moved in to engage what they thought were scattered Alliance remnants, Garx struck. The Obsidian Spear and its accompanying ships emerged from the debris field, launching a devastating barrage that took the Grozilians by surprise. Their formations collapsed as Alliance ships rained down fire from all angles, cutting through Grozilian vessels with brutal efficiency. Explosions lit up the void of space as Grozilian warships were torn apart by the combined firepower of Garvex's fleets. Entire squadrons of enemy ships were obliterated in minutes, their wreckage drifting through the stars. The Grozilians, caught off guard by the intensity and precision of the attack, faltered for the first time since their invasion had begun. Garx, watching the battle unfold from the command deck, allowed himself a small smile. "Terranian tactics," he murmured. "Always one step ahead." The Grozilian advance was halted, at least for the time being. The price had been high, with many Alliance ships lost, but the victory was undeniable. The Grozilians were forced to regroup, buying the Alliance precious time to prepare for the next phase of the war. As the fleet regrouped and repaired their ships, Garx stood alone on the Obsidian Spear, staring out at the stars. His mind was already racing with thoughts of the next battle, but something else gnawed at him. A sense that time was running out. Vortex was right, Garx thought. We can't hold them off forever. He reached for a nearby console and activated a secure channel. A signal, ancient and encoded in the deepest frequencies of space, was sent out into the void. It was a message, a call for help. Somewhere, Garx hoped someone would hear it. Someone who might still remember the Terraneans. Admiral Garx stood on the bridge of the Obsidian Spear, his eyes fixed on the holographic display that flickered before him. The void of space was dotted with the icons of his dwindling fleet, surrounded by an ever-growing sea of Grozilian warships. For months, He had waged a brutal, calculated war, using every tactic he had learned from the long-vanished Terraneans: feints, ambushes, and surprise assaults. But even Terran brilliance had its limits. The Grozilians, a relentless tide of death and destruction, had adapted. Their war machine ground on, unstoppable. Every victory Garx had won came at an increasingly high cost, and every defeat left his forces more fragile. His flotillas, once proud and formidable, were now but fragments of their former strength, corroded bit by bit by the savage efficiency of the Grozilian armada. The war had stretched into months, with fierce battles raging across every contested sector of Alliance space. Garx had slowed the Grozilian advance, buying time for the people of the Alliance to evacuate, regroup, and strengthen their defenses. But time was running out. His final bastion lay ahead, the Galactic sector, where the last great defensive line of the Alliance had been hastily assembled. Now, the Grozilians were on the doorstep of the Galactic, the heart of Alliance territory, the seat of its government, and home to its capital, Zenvoria. The last line of defense was all that stood between the Grozilians and the total collapse of the Galactic Alliance. Garx knew the odds. He had always known. But even as his fleet diminished, his resolve hardened. He turned to his bridge crew, who watched him in silence, their faces pale and weary from endless months of war. "Prepare the fleet for the final engagement," he ordered, his voice calm and resolute. "We will meet them head-on. We will hold the line here, at Galactic." His second-in-command, Commander Talia, a fierce and loyal officer, stepped forward. "Admiral, our forces are severely outnumbered. We've lost most of our cruisers, and the remaining frigates are barely operational. If we engage the Grozilians here, we may not be able to hold them for long." Garx nodded. "I know, Commander, but we have no choice. This is where we make our final stand. Every moment we buy here is time for the rest of the Alliance to prepare. We fight not for victory, but for survival." Talia clenched her jaw but nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. "Yes, sir." Garx watched as the last of his ships moved into formation. Battle cruisers and destroyers battered from months of war, frigates with half their systems offline, and starfighters ready for one last desperate charge. In the distance, the Grozilian fleet loomed like a dark storm on the horizon, their warships countless and seemingly invincible. Their massive, jagged hulls bristling with weapons gilded forward like ancient leviathans of war. The admiral knew they had no hope of matching the Grozilian numbers, but he also knew that he had one advantage: the knowledge of Terran tactics. For all their technological superiority, the Grozilians still feared the ghosts of the Terrans. And Garx would use that fear to its fullest. The battle began with a roar of engines and the flash of weapons fire. Grozilian fighters swarmed forward, their sleek, insectoid ships moving in tight formations, targeting the Alliance ships like a pack of predators descending on weakened prey. Alliance cruisers opened fire, unleashing waves of plasma torpedoes and energy beams. The void of space lit up as the two fleets clashed in a desperate struggle for control. Garx directed the fleet with precision, his voice calm as he issued orders to his captains. "Group Alpha, divert to Sector 7. Flank them from the side. Group Delta, hold position and engage their forward dreadnoughts. We need to cut their spearhead." The Alliance ships moved as one, executing maneuvers that Garx had studied from the ancient Terranean archives. He deployed hit-and-run tactics, feints to draw the Grozilian ships into traps where his remaining cruisers could unleash devastating broadsides. For a time, it worked. Grozilian ships exploded in bright fireballs, their twisted metal debris scattering through the stars. But the Grozilians were relentless. For every ship Garx destroyed, more took its place. The Grozilian war machine was inexhaustible, a tide that could not be turned back. One by one, Alliance ships fell. Destroyers ripped apart by Grozilian energy beams, cruisers overwhelmed by swarms of fighters, and frigates reduced to drifting wreckage. Garx's fleet was shrinking by the minute, his forces corroded by the sheer overwhelming might of the enemy. Hours into the battle, the true force of the Grozilian armada made its presence known. The Grozilian dreadnoughts, massive ships that dwarfed anything the Alliance had ever built, moved forward in unison. Their weapons, ancient and destructive, powered by unknown energy sources, fired devastating beams of energy that cut through the Alliance fleet like a scythe through grain. Garvex watched in grim silence as one of his few remaining battlecruisers, the Valiant, was struck by a dreadnought's primary cannon. The ship disintegrated in a flash of light, its crew lost in an instant. "Admiral, we've lost another cruiser," Talia shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the battle. "Concentrate fire on their lead dreadnought," Garvex ordered. "We need to break their formation." But even as his fleet focused all available firepower on the nearest Grazillian dreadnought, the enemy continued to advance. The Grazillians showed no fear, no hesitation. They pressed forward, overwhelming the Alliance forces with sheer numbers and firepower. Garvex knew that they could not hold much longer. As the last remaining Alliance ships formed a desperate defensive line, Garvex's mind raced. He had used every Terran tactic he knew, every trick, every stratagem. But the Grazillians had adapted, evolving their strategies with each passing battle. They were learning, and now they were closer than ever before, to breaking through to Zenvoria. The capital of the Alliance was just beyond the Galactic sector. If the Grazillians broke through here, the entire Galactic Alliance would fall. "Admiral," Talia called, her voice grim, "we're down to less than 20 ships. Our shields won't hold for long." Garvex clenched his fists. "We can't let them through. If Zenvoria falls, the Alliance is finished." He looked out at the battlefield, his fleet battered and broken. For all his knowledge, for all his Terran-inspired tactics, he had been unable to stop the Grazillian advance. The Grazillians were too powerful, their war machine too relentless. But Garvex knew one thing for certain: they would not give up. They would fight until the last ship, the last soldier, the last breath. "Prepare the final wave," he said quietly. "We're going to charge their lead dreadnought, full force." Talia's eyes widened. "Admiral, that's suicide." Garvex nodded. "I know, but we don't have another choice." The final order was given. The last of the Alliance fleet, the battered remnants of Garvex's flotillas, rallied for one last, desperate assault. They surged forward, engines blazing toward the massive Grazillian dreadnoughts. Energy beams crisscrossed the void as the remaining Alliance ships fired every weapon they had, tearing into the Grazillian lines. But the Grazillians, ever unyielding, responded in kind. One by one, the Alliance ships fell, engulfed in flames and debris. As the obsidian spear took heavy fire, alarms blaring and hull breaches reported from every deck, Garvex stood on the bridge, watching the final moments of the battle unfold. "Admiral," Talia said, her voice choking with emotion, "we've lost almost everyone. We won't survive this." Garvex turned to face her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "We've done everything we could. We've bought the Alliance time. That's all that matters now." Outside the viewport, the Grazillian dreadnought loomed, its weapons charging for a final, devastating strike. "To all ships," Garvex said over the comms, his voice steady, "it's been an honor. Hold the line for as long as you can, for the Alliance." The Grazillian cannon fired. The bridge exploded in light. The great cities of Zenvoria, capital of the Galactic Alliance, stood on the brink of oblivion. The sky above the mother planet was filled with the crimson glow of evacuation ships, leaving in haste, scattering to the far reaches of the galaxy, desperately trying to avoid the oncoming storm. The Grazillians, an unstoppable force, were only hours away. Their war machine had devoured entire sectors of Alliance territory, and now the final line of defense had crumbled. In the council room of the Celestial Citadel, chaos reigned. High-ranking officials and military commanders barked orders into comms, their voices rising in panic. Screens flashed with distress signals from across the Galactic sector, showing the last remnants of Admiral Garvex's fleet being obliterated, one ship after another. Zenvoria's defenses, though valiant, were crumbling fast. The council chamber, once a place of order and debate, was now filled with the grim realization that the end had come. Suddenly, the lights flickered and every screen in the chamber went dark. Silence fell as a ripple of confusion passed through the room. Then, one by one, the screens lit up again. A single image filled them all. A man stood before them, calm, resolute, and dressed in an immaculate white uniform that seemed to glow against the backdrop of stars. The markings on his uniform were unlike anything the Alliance had seen in millennia, but they were unmistakable. The Terranean crest. The council chamber gasped. The Terraneans, the lost race, were thought to be myths, gone for over 2,000 years. Yet here, standing before them, was a living relic of that ancient and powerful civilization. "I am Admiral Samuel Crow," the man said, his voice steady and authoritative. "I represent Terra Nova. We have received your signal. Terra is on your side." The council members started in stunned silence as the transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun. The image of Admiral Crow disappeared from the screens, leaving a silence more profound than the chaos that had preceded it. The room buzzed with disbelief. Had the Terraneans, the very saviors they had long hoped for, finally returned? Moments later, the sky above Zenvoria, which had once been filled with evacuation ships and the terror of impending doom, was ablaze with activity. In orbit, where the scattered remnants of the Alliance defense fleet prepared for the inevitable Grazillian invasion, something extraordinary happened. In the vast reaches of the Galactic sector, near the remnants of the last Alliance fleet, space itself began to tear. A rift, shimmering with energy, formed like a wound in the fabric of reality. Its edges crackled with raw power, and then, one after another, enormous ships began to emerge. The Terranian flotilla. Hundreds of Terran warships poured through the rift, their sleek, angular designs unlike anything the Alliance or Grazillians had ever seen. The Terranian vessels gleamed with dark metallic plating, their hulls adorned with markings that pulsed with a soft white-blue glow. They moved with grace and precision, as if perfectly in tune with the space around them. Each ship was massive, larger and more imposing than even the Grazillian dreadnoughts. Their energy signatures were off the charts, weapons primed and shields activated. At the head of this armada, a colossal battleship, the Phoenix, emerged from the rift, its sleek hull radiating power. The Grazillians, taken aback by the sudden appearance of the Terran fleet, hesitated for the first time in the entire war. Their ships, though vast in number, were no match for the sheer presence of the Terranian war machine. But the Grazillians were nothing if not relentless, and soon enough, their command issued orders to engage. The battle began with a fury unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The first wave of Grazillian warships surged forward, firing their devastating plasma cannons and energy beams. The void of space lit up with the intense exchange of fire, but the Terranian ships responded in kind. Unlike the Alliance vessels which had struggled to withstand Grazillian firepower, the Terran ships absorbed the incoming energy with ease, their shields glowing but holding firm. "All units," came the calm voice of Admiral Samuel Crow, "engage at will." The Terranian fleet unleashed hell. Massive energy beams, far more advanced than anything the Alliance had ever known, shot out from the Terran warships. These beams sliced through Grazillian vessels as if they were paper, tearing apart entire dreadnoughts with a single volley. Terranian fighters, sleek and agile, swarmed through the Grazillian formations, dancing between enemy ships and unleashing concentrated bursts of high-energy plasma that tore through shields and hulls alike. Within minutes, entire Grazillian squadrons were obliterated. Grazillian destroyers, which had once been feared for their overwhelming firepower, exploded in brilliant flashes of light, their debris scattering into the endless void. The Phoenix, the Terran flagship, led the charge, its main cannon unleashing a pulse of energy so powerful that it shattered the core of the Grazillian command ship, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Grazillians, once thought to be unbeatable, were in complete disarray. Their ships, though numerous, were no match for the precision and overwhelming force of the Terranean armada. The battle, which had raged for months across the galaxy, was being decided in mere tens of minutes. Admiral Crow watched from the bridge of the Phoenix, his expression calm and focused as the tactical display showed Grazillian forces evaporating from the battlefield. "Focus fire on the dreadnoughts," he ordered. "We'll cut off their command structure and break them entirely." The Terranian ships coordinated perfectly, moving in flawless formation. Grazillian dreadnoughts, once the terror of the galaxy, fell in rapid succession, their hulks torn apart by the sheer might of Terran weapons. One by one, Grazillian vessels were obliterated until all that remained were scattered survivors, desperately trying to flee. But there was no escape. The Terranians pursued them, methodically hunting down every last ship, ensuring that the Grazillian threat was neutralized for good. The once invincible Grazillian war machine was reduced to wreckage, floating aimlessly in space. As the last Grazillian ship disintegrated under the Terran barrage, the battlefield grew eerily silent. The stars, once ablaze with the fury of war, were now filled with the quiet presence of the Terran fleet, standing victorious. Admiral Crow stood on the bridge, gazing out into the depths of space where moments before, the Grazillians had been advancing on Zenvoria. Now, there was nothing left of their once-feared armada. "Send a transmission to the Alliance," Crow said, his voice quiet but steady. "Let them know. Terra has returned." The crew of the Phoenix moved swiftly, and soon the message was sent. Across Zenvoria, across every Alliance world still intact, a message of hope was broadcast. The Terraneans, once lost, had come back to save the galaxy from the brink of annihilation. Their power had broken the Grazillian threat in mere minutes, where the Alliance had struggled for months. And though the war was far from over, one thing was certain. With Terra Nova at their side, the Alliance had hope once again. Months had passed since the triumphant return of the Terraneans, and the galaxy had changed beyond recognition. In the wake of the Terraneans' crushing victory over the Grazillian armada, their influence spread across every sector once ravaged by the war. As the Terranian fleets advanced through Grazillian-occupied space, they brought with them not only unmatched military power, but also a beacon of hope that had long been absent from the hearts of the Alliance. One by one, systems that had fallen to Grazillian conquest were liberated. Planets that had been under siege for months were freed, their people cheering as the sleek, imposing warships of the Terranians arrived in orbit. The Terranians, with their superior technology and unbreakable resolve, advanced like a tidal wave, sweeping through sectors that had once seemed hopelessly lost. With each victory, the legend of Terra grew. Tales of their return spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Stories of their immaculate ships, their unmatched precision in battle, and their mysterious past, now intertwined with the future of the Galactic Alliance. In the midst of this resurgence, remnants of the old Alliance fleet, hundreds of ships of all sizes, rallied behind the Terranean armada. Frigates, cruisers, and battleships that had survived the brutal Grazillian campaign were now part of a unified force, fighting alongside the Terraneans in a final, decisive push toward the heart of the Grazillian Empire. Their destination, Grozalax, the mother planet of the Grazillians. The Galactic sector, once the last bastion of Alliance defense, had become the staging ground for the largest combined fleet the galaxy had ever seen. At its head was the Terranian flagship, the Phoenix, flanked by thousands of Terranian warships, each one a symbol of Terra's resurgence. Behind them, the surviving ships of the Alliance, now fully repaired and retrofitted with Terranian technology, stood ready for battle. It had taken months to reach the outer edges of Grazillian space, but the journey had been relentless. With each system the Terranians liberated, more worlds rallied to their cause. Entire planets, once fearful of annihilation, now threw their support behind Terra, offering resources, ships, and soldiers to aid in the final assault. At the heart of the Terranian fleet, Admiral Samuel Crow watched as his forces assembled. His expression, as always, was calm and focused, his mind already planning the inevitable confrontation. "We're approaching Grozalax," reported his second-in-command, Captain Lauren. "Scanners show massive defensive arrays in orbit, and the Grazillian fleet is gathering for what looks to be their last stand." Crow nodded. "It won't matter. This ends today." Unlike 2,000 years ago, when the Terranians had forced the Grazillians into submission and exile, this time there would be no mercy. The Grazillian war machine had threatened the entire galaxy twice over, and now the Terranians would ensure that threat was eliminated for good. As the combined fleet reached the edges of the Grozalax system, the tension in the void of space was palpable. In the distance, the blood-red planet of Grozalax loomed, surrounded by the remnants of the Grazillian fleet. A vast armada of dreadnoughts, destroyers, and warships, their once proud vessels now desperate and disorganized. The Grazillians had fought fiercely to protect their empire, but their losses over the past months had weakened them. The Terranians, with their superior tactics and technology, had worn them down at every turn. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Crow commanded, his voice broadcast across the Terranian fleet. "The Grazillians will not go quietly, but we will finish what we started." Within moments, the void of space erupted into a maelstrom of firepower. The Grazillian ships, once feared across the galaxy, surged forward in a final, desperate assault. Their plasma cannons and energy weapons fired relentlessly, but the Terranian ships absorbed the brunt of the attack with their advanced shielding, returning fire with devastating precision. Terranian warships sliced through the Grazillian formations like blades through cloth. Massive beams of energy tore through Grazillian dreadnoughts, shattering them into debris. Starfighters weaved through the battlefield, their movements so fluid and coordinated that the Grazillian fighters stood no chance. In mere minutes, the Grazillian fleet, once a symbol of power, was reduced to burning wreckage. Explosions lit up the skies of Grazilax as the Terranians unleashed their full might upon the enemy. But the Terranians were not done. Admiral Crow watched as the final Grazillian warship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, leaving nothing between the Terranian fleet and Grazilax itself. "Target the planet," Crow ordered. With grim determination, the Terranian fleet prepared to deliver the final blow. The orbital defenses of Grazilax crumbled under their assault, and soon the planet was exposed. This time there would be no diplomacy, no negotiation. The Terranian ships unleashed their full firepower on the planet. Beams of energy struck the surface, causing massive explosions to ripple across the continents. Grazilax, the birthplace of the Grazillian race, was being torn apart from the inside. In a matter of hours, the once mighty planet was reduced to nothing more than ash and debris, wiped from the face of the universe. The Alliance was free to enter a new age of prosperity. The Terranians, once a mystery and a legend, had now become the central power of the galaxy. Their fleets patrolled the sectors, ensuring that no remnants of the Grazillian threat remained. But more than that, they offered the galaxy something it had longed for since the war had begun: hope. A new council was formed, composed of representatives from the many worlds of the Alliance, but it was the Terranians who led it. With their advanced knowledge and technology, they offered the galaxy maps of unexplored space, revealing entire regions beyond the borders of known space. Territories where Terra had already established colonies and settlements. These new maps opened up avenues for trade, communication, and exploration, breathing new life into a galaxy that had been on the brink of annihilation. New worlds were discovered, and with them, new resources, markets, and opportunities. The Galactic Alliance flourished once again, its economies recovering and its people finding peace after years of war. Under the guidance of the Terranians, the galaxy entered a golden age of prosperity. Terra Nova, the new home of the Terranians, became a symbol of unity and strength. And though the galaxy had been scarred by war, it had emerged stronger than ever. Admiral Crow, now the de facto leader of the Terranian forces and a key figure in the new council, stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, watching as the galaxy they had saved began to heal. His gaze turned to the distant stars beyond the edges of the maps they had shared with the Alliance. "There is always more to discover," Crow whispered to himself, "always more to protect." As the Terranians continued their mission, the galaxy knew that as long as Terra stood, it would be safe. The age of Terra had begun.
If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel and press the like button. It helps me a lot. Thank you very much.